The Buffalo Bills have made more moves. The Bills are just stocking up on the defensive line. They've added to their edge position already with Mario Addison, and they've added to the interior of the defensive line with Quinton Jefferson and Vernon Butler. Two, I would say, perfect scheme fits for Sean McDermott's defense and what he's looking for to get after the quarterback. They did lose Jordan Phillips in the interior, so they needed to look for some value guys that they could sign to replace him and also add to the depth of this D-line. Last year, I felt like the interior defensive line of the Bills was perhaps the weakness because they really lost Phillips during the middle of the season, and Starr wasn't quite playing at the level that you would want him to play at, and Oliver hadn't yet developed into the stud that I think many of us think he'll be. So the Bills, their run defense wasn't fantastic. So what do? You gain and you add a couple of interior defensive linemen that can add some size to the interior defensive line, but also get after the quarterback and just add some depth, because I think that's a big thing for Buffalo. Is like every great D-line, you need that rotation, you need that line change. And a lot of teams have kind of adapted this philosophy of having as many bodies on the D-line as humanly possible. And that's just like the Bills. You know, the Bills may not have like a top-notch defensive end or edge rusher, which maybe they'll go after one still. We're still waiting for that. Maybe it won't happen. But they have a lot of at least good players or solid players. And that's enough for McDermott to create pressure on the quarterback. So let's start off with Quinton Jefferson of the Seahawks. Jefferson, 6'4", 291. He is going on 27. He actually turns 27 at the end of March. So he's right in the prime of his career for a defensive lineman, and he had probably his best season ever last year. I know he ranked very highly for PFF, and he was one of my under-the-radar, underrated defensive linemen of this entire free agency. You look at how he's played the last two seasons. He has 6.5 sacks combined, but his quarterback hits really tell the story. 25 quarterback hits in the last two seasons. And that's 15 in 2018 and 10 last season. He had 3.5 sacks this past season. He also had 3 passes defense and a fumble recovery this year. He played 14 of the possible 16 games, and he was mostly a starter in the interior for Seattle. He's a guy that I think very good budget signing, and I think he might actually only be getting better, considering he's only really been a starter for 2 years since he was 25, now 27. I think he's going to get better, but his main strength is as a pass rusher. He's okay versus the run. He'll hold up versus the run, but his main strength is as a pass rusher. And I do think the Bills need pass rushers up front, whether that's on the edge or in the interior. You add Jefferson next to Oliver on third downs or on passing situations, and you have a duo that's going to wreak havoc and get after the quarterback. And I think this is a good replacement for Jordan Phillips. And I would not be shocked if you saw Jefferson kind of replicate some better sack numbers closer to what Phillips had. And I think his sack numbers will actually go up from Seattle, just given the scheme that Buffalo plays. And their interior guys tend to put up those sack totals. But that also could swing to Oliver, which you're expecting to have a big season in year number 2. The other ad that the Buffalo Bills had was a former first-round pick and a player that McDermott very well will know how to utilize, right? So the other player they signed was Vernon Butler. Vernon Butler is a former first-round pick from the Carolina Panthers. And I'm not quite sure if McDermott crossed over with Vernon Butler early in his career. He may have, but either way, you look at the way that a player will fit in a scheme and you try to replicate it, and that's exactly the way that Butler will come into the Buffalo defense. And I would actually argue that Butler probably will be better utilized in Buffalo because Sean McDermott's one of the better defensive coaches in the league, and he's going to be able to maximize Butler in his defense. And I think just like Jefferson, I think the strength of Butler is his pass rushing ability. This past season, he had 6 sacks, which was a huge uptick to actually fulfilling his potential. He wasn't quite able to stay with Carolina, but 6 sacks is impressive for any interior defensive lineman. It might have been a little bit circumstantial, but when he got to the quarterback, he also forced fumbles. He had 3 forced fumbles last year. He just saw an uptick in play. Like this year, he started 9 games out of the 14 games he played. And last year, the year before that, he hadn't started a single game. Like wasn't considered a starter on the Panthers. But last year, he was a starter. So the more snaps you get, obviously the more chances you get to sack the quarterback and make an impact. 32 tackles last year, the most of his career as well, and 8 quarterback hits, most of his career as well. Taking a look at some of the advanced stats, he also had 12 pressures on the quarterback, according to Pro Football Reference. So, good season last year for him, good player, and like I said, a pass rusher. Another guy that's going to get after the quarterback, and being from Carolina, being from Ron Rivera's defense, it's going to be a perfect scheme fit and just another depth player. And we'll see if actually this first-round pick turns into a diamond in the rough for the Buffalo Bills. So 2 potentially really good players that kind of snuck under the radar for the Bills here on the defensive line.